The summer of 1914 began with the usual rhythms of life across Europe. Markets bustled, trains rushed between cities, children ran in the streets, and the old continent carried on with the illusion that peace was unshakable. Beneath that calm, however, the tensions of alliances, rivalries, and ambitions had already woven an invisible web around the nations. When a young Serbian nationalist fired 2 bullets in Sarajevo on June 28, ending the lives of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife, the world tilted. The event itself was local, an act of violence that might otherwise have been condemned and forgotten, but the bonds of treaties and the weight of pride turned it into a spark that lit the globe on fire. Austria-Hungary, shaken and determined to assert dominance over Serbia, issued an ultimatum so harsh it was designed to be rejected. Serbia's refusal on certain points became the excuse for war. Russia, bound by cultural and political ties to the Slavic people of Serbia, mobilized. Germany, Austria-Hungary's closest ally, prepared to stand firm. France, tied to Russia, braced itself. Britain hesitated at first, but the violation of Belgium's neutrality soon drew it in. Within weeks, what should have been a conflict between two nations spread like wildfire across Europe. The soldiers of different empires, most of them young and hopeful, cheered as they marched to war, convinced it would be over by Christmas. They could not imagine the years of blood, mud, and sorrow that awaited them. The first battles came quickly, filled with movement and daring. Germany executed its Schlieffen Plan, sending its armies sweeping through Belgium toward France, believing it could crush the French before Russia's vast forces could fully mobilize. Villages burned, civilians fled, and the ground shook with the thunder of artillery. Belgium resisted heroically, slowing the German advance and drawing the fury of the invaders. Paris braced for attack, but the French and British forces countered at the Marne in September 1914. The German advance was halted, and with that, the war transformed. Neither side could push the other into submission. The soldiers dug into the earth, carving deep trenches across northern France. What began as temporary shelters became a permanent, horrifying landscape of mud, rats, and despair. Life in the trenches was a brutal existence. Soldiers woke to the sound of shells exploding overhead, their nerves frayed by the constant threat of snipers and gas attacks. The stench of unwashed bodies, decaying corpses, and stagnant water filled the air. Food was often cold and meager, and rest was disturbed by bombardments that came at any hour. Letters from home offered brief moments of warmth, but they were followed by the chilling reality that the next dawn might bring a command to climb over the top. When whistles blew, men scrambled out of their trenches into a wasteland of barbed wire and craters, charging toward enemy lines under a hail of machine gun fire. Millions fell in these futile offensives, fields soaked in blood for mere yards of gain. Battles like Verdun and the Somme became synonymous with slaughter, each claiming hundreds of thousands of lives, yet neither breaking the deadlock. The Eastern Front told a different story, one of vast spaces and shifting lines. Here, German and Austro-Hungarian forces clashed with the massive armies of Russia. The battles were larger in scale but less stagnant. The Russian soldiers, brave but poorly supplied, often fought with dwindling ammunition and insufficient weapons. Defeat after defeat weakened the Tsar's authority at home, fueling unrest that would eventually explode into revolution. Yet on both sides of Europe, the human cost was unbearable. Families received telegrams, informing them of losses. Villages mourned fathers, sons, and brothers who would never return. Women entered factories to replace men at war, their hands building the weapons that fueled the conflict. Beyond Europe, the war spread to distant colonies and seas. Battles raged in Africa and the Middle East, where soldiers fought not only the enemy but also the unforgiving climate. In the Arabian desert, the revolt against the Ottoman Empire was supported by British officers, including the now legendary figure of T.E. Lawrence. On the oceans, German U-boats prowled, sinking merchant ships and drawing neutral nations into the struggle. The most infamous incident was the sinking of the Lusitania in 1915, killing over 1,000 civilians, including Americans. The world watched, horrified, as the war's cruelty touched even those far from the trenches. Technology advanced with deadly efficiency. Poison gas crept silently across no man's land, burning lungs and blinding eyes. Tanks, still clumsy and unreliable, rolled into battle as new beasts of war. Airplanes, first used for reconnaissance, soon carried machine guns and bombs, turning the skies into a new battlefield. Each innovation promised a breakthrough but instead only deepened the scale of destruction. The soldiers bore the brunt, their bodies sacrificed to strategies that seldom worked and commanders who clung to outdated notions of glory. By 1917, exhaustion had set in. Millions were dead, economies strained, and morale faltered. Russia, broken by defeats and political upheaval, saw revolution topple the Tsar. The new Bolshevik government, desperate for peace, withdrew from the war, signing a harsh treaty with Germany. Yet Germany's brief hope of victory was short-lived. In April 1917, the United States declared war on Germany, provoked by unrestricted submarine warfare and Germany's attempt to incite Mexico against America. At first, U.S. involvement was small, but their arrival gave the Allies fresh energy. American soldiers, well-fed and optimistic, marched into Europe, bringing with them the promise of change. Germany launched one final massive offensive in the spring of 1918, hoping to win before American forces could arrive in full strength. At first, they broke through, pushing the Allies back with terrifying speed. But their advance stretched supply lines thin, and the Allies, reinforced by American troops, counterattacked. The tide turned swiftly. German soldiers, weary, hungry, and disillusioned, began to falter. At home, strikes and protests erupted as civilians faced starvation due to the Allied blockade. The once mighty empire was crumbling. On November 11, 1918, the guns finally fell silent. An armistice was signed, and soldiers emerged from their trenches, stunned that the horror was over. Across Europe, bells rang, people wept, and flags waved, but the celebrations were mixed with grief. Millions were gone, millions more scarred for life. Towns were destroyed, farmlands ruined, and families shattered. The war that was supposed to be short and glorious had become a nightmare etched into every memory. The peace that followed was uneasy. In 1919, the Treaty of Versailles was signed, placing full blame for the war on Germany and demanding heavy reparations. The German people, humiliated and burdened, simmered with resentment. Empires that had stood for centuries, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, German, Russian, were gone, replaced by fragile new nations struggling to find their place. The world had changed irrevocably. Women, who had stepped into roles once denied to them, found new voices in society. Technology that had been created for destruction would later shape civilian life. The war, meant to end wars, had instead planted seeds for the next great conflict. Yet, among the ruins, there were also stories of courage, compassion, and endurance. Soldiers shared food with former enemies, civilians rebuilt their homes from rubble, and poets and writers tried to give voice to the unspeakable pain they had witnessed. The memory of those who fell lived on in graves across Europe, silent fields marked with white crosses and red poppies. The world had learned, too late, the true cost of pride and rivalry. World War I was not only a clash of armies but also a tragedy of humanity. It tore apart nations, families, and hearts, leaving scars visible even a century later. For the young men who had marched so eagerly in 1914, believing in quick victory and lasting glory, it became a lesson written in blood, that war, once unleashed, is a beast no nation can control. And though the guns fell silent in 1918, their echo continued to shape the world, a warning whispered through history.